Gloria Ledoux on the CU Compliance Connection by League Info site, here to bring you an overview of the CFPB's amendments to the mortgage servicing rules that become effective this October 19th. Keep in mind, there's actually two effective dates associated with these amendments. The first is what we'll be talking about in this video, effective this October, and the second set of changes become effective on April 1st of 2018. As an overview, there were a significant amount of changes that impacted both Regulation Z, TILA, or Truth in Lending, and Regulation X, RESPA, or the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. Here is an overview of some of the impacted sections of both of these regulations that I will be going over today. Let's first start with the changes made to force-placed insurance. Prior to the amendments, the notification requirements for force-placed insurance really dealt with the borrower having expired insurance or insurance that has not been in place continuously. Before charging the member a fee for force-placing insurance, the servicer was required to send out certain notifications within certain time periods. Well, those notifications are still required, and nothing has changed with the timing of the notices. What has changed is that the content within the notification has changed to address situations where a borrower may have insufficient insurance coverage. Similar to the initial notice that is sent out to borrowers 45 days prior to assessing a fee, the servicer also has to send out reminder notices at least 15 days prior to assessing a fee related to force-placed insurance. The content of these notices were also revised to address the potential for insufficient coverage. Credit unions can find the model forms and the language within Appendix MS3 of Regulation X. Another amendment was the addition of a delinquency definition. This new definition will apply to all of the servicing provisions of Regulation X and the periodic statements for mortgage loans under Regulation Z. Therefore, as it pertains to mortgage servicing, delinquency means the period of time during which a borrower and a borrower's mortgage loan obligation are delinquent. The definition goes on to say that a borrower and a borrower's mortgage loan obligation are delinquent beginning on the date a periodic payment sufficient to cover principal, interest, and if applicable, escrow becomes due and unpaid until such time as no periodic payment is due and unpaid. This definition becomes important when we talk about the early intervention requirements. Under the mortgage servicing rules, credit unions have to establish or make good faith efforts to establish live contact with a delinquent borrower no later than the 36th day of a borrower's delinquency. The amended rules require the credit union to make good faith efforts to establish live contact again no later than 36 days after each payment due date, as long as the borrower remains delinquent. The commentary provides an example of this. Say your member's payment due date is January 1st, and they fail to make a periodic payment of principal, interest, and escrow by that date. The credit union servicer has to make good faith efforts to make live contact within 36 days of January 1st. If the borrower fails to make the payment on February 1st, the servicer has to make live contact again within 36 days of February 1st. Credit unions should use the payment due date, even if there is a grace period for your calculations. Also, keep in mind that live contact with a borrower includes telephoning or conducting an in-person meeting with the borrower, but not leaving a recorded phone message. You may, but need not, rely on live contact established at the borrower's initiative to satisfy the live contact requirement of early intervention. Similar changes were also made to the written notice requirements that require a credit union servicer to provide a delinquent borrower with written notice no later than the 45th day of the borrower's delinquency. Amendments now require the credit union to provide notice again no later than 45 days after each payment due date, as long as the borrower remains delinquent. Credit unions will want to make sure they update their procedures and processes to reflect these changes. So, for example, if a payment is due on March 1st, written notice must be provided by April 15th. If the borrower doesn't make the April 1st payment and does not pay the original amount due during the 45 days after April 1st, you don't need to send the notice again until after October 12th, 180 days. There's a partial exemption to the early intervention requirements when a borrower on a mortgage loan is either a debtor in bankruptcy or when the credit union is a debt collector under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, or FDCPA, and the borrower has provided notification under the rule. If the borrower meets one of those conditions, the debtor in bankruptcy or invoked protections under the FDCPA, the credit union is exempt from the live contact requirements. If there are no loss mitigation options available, the credit union is also exempt from the written notice requirements if the borrower meets one of those conditions. If the member is both a debtor in bankruptcy and invoked protections under the FDCPA, the servicer is exempt from the written notice requirements. However, if any loss mitigation option is available and either of those two conditions are met, the debtor in bankruptcy or invoked protections under the FDCPA, the servicer must comply with the modified written notice requirements for the mortgage loan. For borrowers in bankruptcy only, no notification pursuant to the FDCPA with loss mitigation options available, the credit union servicer must provide written notice to the borrower no later than the 45th day after the first of the following two events. Either after the borrower files a bankruptcy petition if they are delinquent when they become a debtor in bankruptcy, or no later than the 45th day of the borrower's delinquency if they are not delinquent when they file a bankruptcy petition, but become delinquent as a debtor in bankruptcy. The modified written notice sent by the credit union servicer cannot contain a request for payment, and the credit union is not required to provide the written notice more than once during a single bankruptcy case. If the borrower has provided notice pursuant to the FDCPA only, not in bankruptcy, and there are loss mitigation options available, the modified written notice must include a statement that the servicer intends to invoke its specified remedy of foreclosure, but must exclude a request for payment. Additionally, the servicer is prohibited from providing the written notice more than once during any 180-day period. Please remember that there are model clauses within the regulation that credit unions can utilize to ensure compliance with the notification changes. Because the early intervention exemption requirements are a little tricky, I wanted to reference this nice chart that is included in the CFPB's Small Entity Compliance Guide. This makes it a little easier for the credit union to determine if there is an exemption and for which type of notification under the rules. If you have a borrower that was previously exempt from the notification requirements because they were a debtor in bankruptcy, the credit union servicer is required to resume compliance after the next payment due date that follows the earliest event, including when the bankruptcy case is dismissed, when the bankruptcy case is closed, or when the borrower reaffirms personal liability for the mortgage loan. The credit union servicer is not required to resume compliance with the live contact earlier intervention requirements if the borrower has discharged personal liability on a mortgage loan pursuant to Chapter 7, 11, 12, and 13 of the Bankruptcy Code. However, for the written notice requirements, the credit union must resume compliance if the borrower has made any partial or periodic payment on the mortgage loan after commencement of the borrower's bankruptcy case. The amended rules will also require credit unions to make changes to their policies and procedures for evaluating loss mitigation applications. Effective in October, there is a requirement for the credit union to include the process of promptly identifying and obtaining documents or information not in the borrower's control if the credit union is requiring that information for a loss mitigation option. In general, the credit union will need to conduct reasonable due diligence in order to obtain the documents or information being requested and will be prohibited from denying complete loss mitigation applications because the credit union lacks that documentation or information unless, of course, they meet certain conditions. So if the credit union lacks the documentation or information that is not in the borrower's control, what are those conditions that the credit union servicer must meet in order to deny an otherwise complete loss mitigation application? First, the servicer must have exercised reasonable due diligence to obtain the required information or documentation. They should have continued trying without success for a significant period of time following the 30-day period required for the servicer to evaluate a loss mitigation application. And then at last, if the servicer is still unable to determine which loss mitigation options, if any, will be offered without those missing documents or information, they can deny the application. If the credit union servicer within that 30 days or promptly after is unable to make a determination as to which loss mitigation option it will offer because it lacks the required documents or information from a third party, notice will have to be sent to the borrower that includes the information listed on the slide. Within the section of Regulation X related to loss mitigation procedures, there were also changes made associated with the evaluation of an incomplete loss mitigation application. Credit union servicers can offer a short-term payment forbearance program or a short-term repayment plan to a borrower based on an evaluation of an incomplete loss mitigation application. The written notice provided by the credit union must indicate that other loss mitigation options may be available and that the borrower has the option to submit a complete loss mitigation application to be evaluated for all those options available. Additionally, the rule also addresses facially complete applications, which are those situations where the borrower provides the credit union with all the missing documents and information as required when no additional information is requested or once the credit union servicer is required to provide the borrower with a written notice of complete application. On this slide, we highlight the changes to the notice that the credit union servicers are required to send for a complete loss mitigation application. The written notice must include verification that the loss mitigation application is complete, the date the application was received, and that the servicer expects to complete its evaluation within 30 days of the date it received the application, that the borrower is entitled to certain foreclosure protections, that the servicer may need additional information at a later date, and that the borrower may also be entitled to additional protections under state and federal law. For those credit unions that purchase servicing rights, there were quite a few changes that were made. If, for example, a credit union acquires servicing rights for a loan for which there is a loss mitigation application pending as of the transfer date, the credit union who acquired the rights must comply with the loss mitigation rules that applied for that loss mitigation application prior to the transfer and within the timeframes that were applicable to that servicer that transferred the loan. If the credit union that acquires the servicing rights determines that notice was not sent out to the borrower to acknowledge a complete or incomplete application, the new servicer must send out notice within 10 days of the transfer date. There are also revised provisions that address situations where a servicer acquires the servicing of a mortgage loan for which a complete loss mitigation application is pending as of the transfer date. The new servicer, within 30 days of the transfer date, must have procedures in place to evaluate that loss mitigation application and exercise reasonable diligence in obtaining any required documents or information not in the borrower's control. Lastly, if a credit union servicer acquires servicing rights for a loan where there is a pending loss mitigation offer that has not expired as of the transfer date, they must allow the borrower to accept or reject the offer during that unexpired balance of the applicable time period. Okay, we're coming to the end. Bear with me. The last changes effective in October have to do with the periodic statements for charged-off loans. If the credit union servicer has charged off the loan in accordance with loan loss provisions and will not charge any additional fees or interest on the account, and they provide either within 30 days of charge-off or on the most recent periodic statement, the language contained on this slide under the second bullet point, they are exempt from the periodic statement requirements. I know that was a lot. Keep in mind, this is only a summary of the changes that become effective in October. We will be recording a separate video for the changes that will become effective in April of 2018 at a later date. Credit unions are encouraged to leverage our other League InfoSite resources such as InfoSite, CU Policy Bureau, and ComplySite to help with compliance of these amendments. Make sure to reach out to your league or association for more information. We hope this was helpful, and we thank you for joining us at the CU Compliance Connection. Be sure to stay tuned for future broadcasts on issues that affect your credit union. We are here to help you at the CU Compliance Connection by League InfoSite.